Welcome to 10 Years Out, Stories from My Queer Community. I'm your host, Sam, and it is my 10 years out. My pronouns are she, her, yeah, and I identify as queer. And here with me today is one of my good friends, Jonathan Bay.
I'm so happy to be here.
Hi, Jonathan. I
Hello.
love the story that Jonathan and I have for our meeting because it was in Edinburgh, Scotland, when we were both living there. I was living there a little more temporarily than his temporarily. His temporarily was longer. But we met at this super cool, affirming church in Edinburgh, and it was the most trans people in a church that I've ever seen, and it was
Same.
awesome.
Very awesome.
Okay, so start off with the basics. What are your pronouns? How do you identify? And how long have you been out?
I'm a trans man. My pronouns are he, him, and I just calculated how long I've been out. Almost 16 years, like 15 and a half.
Nice.
Yeah, I was a wee babe.
I love it.
Um, I'm so excited to be part of this because I think it's such a wonderful idea to mark your 10 years. And I really wish I had done more of that marking myself because they're really important milestones, I think, um, especially for a community where we often have to fight for that celebration anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I wish I had, maybe I should do a celebration at some point,
I mean,
but
that's what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, this has just been like the coolest thing I've ever seen happen.
I have been really excited about the response. The people who have wanted to tell their stories and talk about what they've learned, and then the way that I've gotten to interject my story and what I've learned into the different episodes has been, I mean, just wonderful all around. Okay, so what do we need to know about your story before we talk about what you've learned since coming out?
I mean, I came out at 19 and in like trans time, that feels like a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Just because like the process of transition has changed so much
Mm,
since then. For example, when I was doing like the medical part of my transition, I was seeing an endocrinologist during her break time, so there's no
oh,
actual record of that. Like
oh,
some of it was like sort of under the table. There was a lot different gatekeeping than I think there is now. But
interesting.
now that there have been like, 500 anti-trans bills this year,
Mm.
it's quite different.
Right, we go
But
back to
I
the
would
break
say
rooms.
like maybe 2020, 2019, like so because I lived abroad, I grew up in California. I'm living in California now. And I think it was fairly easy to transition within California. And it really depends as a trans person where you were born. If you want
Mm-hmm.
to change your birth certificate, some states don't let you. So there's a lot of complexity and a lot of I don't know. Anyways, my experience is very much rooted in that time period,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Totally. Even in California, you were meeting with doctors on their breaks under the table, so to speak,
Yeah, yeah.
off
And
the
they
record.
they were still like pretty rigid about standards of care. So I had to like live for a year as my preferred gender before I was
Mm.
allowed any kind of medical intervention.
Okay.
And then a lot of it was like very hands off from from the doctors where it was just like, okay, here you go. Here's some testosterone. And they did some tests, but then you know, they didn't really know what they were doing. And they know a lot more what they're doing now. And it really depends on your provider too, how
Mm.
much training they've had. Um, I mean, a lot of the time, like there just isn't funding in trans research, so they're still winging it, is kind of how it feels.
I'm glad you made it through that process
Yeah, yeah. And
as an
it's
experiment.
not as experimental as other people. I wasn't the first, but I did get to be the first person who um, got covered surgery through my university, actually.
Oh.
So that's how I got um, top surgery. And without that, I don't think I would have been able to afford it. But it also meant that because I was one of the first people, they only worked with certain doctors. And like,
Mm.
I don't know that I was very eager at the time to do that because
Mm-hmm.
that to me felt like a huge barrier
Mm-hmm.
to be getting to just do things that I actually wanted to do, like go swimming, be at the beach. Um, but I feel like the longer, like the older I've gotten, I think I probably would have maybe done something slightly different. But it was really helpful at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
one of my friends was instrumental in getting that coverage like put through. She was like on one of the committees that helped advocate for that coverage.
Oh, cool.
So I'm pretty grateful for that.
Wow. She changed your
Yeah,
life.
yeah, yeah, definitely,
Just goes to
definitely.
show what advocacy can do.
Yes, it really can do quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then because I had mostly transitioned when I moved to the UK, I didn't have to go through all the barriers that other people had too. So I didn't even have to like deal with the gender clinic, which is just, I mean, now it's just insane. Like the wait times for any kind of interventions of any kind, even just therapists, is
Mm-hmm.
like 4 years or something. It's
4 years in the UK?
Mhm. If you want to
Four
get the
years.
free option. So a lot of people, like through the NHS, a lot of
Right.
people are trying to raise money to go outside of that. And in the
Yeah.
US, we don't really have that free option
Yeah.
anyways. But yeah, not having to entangle with that was kind of nice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, back to the the
Anyways,
before the before coming out story.
when I came out, my family was not cool with it at all. Oddly, um, I mean, I came out and then 2 weeks later, I got together with my current partner. Um, and her family was more okay with us faster than mine was, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, my family came around, but I think it took about 3 or 4 years for my immediate family. And then some of my aunts and uncles, it took like 7+ years
Yeah.
before
Was
they
it
got
religious
to me.
hangups or other things?
I mean, my family's not really religious, but the family that took a long time is quite religious,
Yeah.
and I think it was that. I think a lot of it is just like not really understanding what that would mean and
Mm.
thinking that you're completely losing your child when you're really not. Like I'm
Yeah.
not any different than I was before I transitioned. I just am like nicer to be around because
Unhappy.
I'm not an unhappy like depressed ball.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think it took my parents a long time to kind of realize like, oh, okay, this isn't that weird.
What have you learned since coming out, Jonathan?
Yeah. So I feel like this is a really interesting question because I constantly feel like I don't really know what I know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know procedural stuff, um, but I think that I really learned what I don't know. Um, and that, like, I know we're going to get to this question later, but I feel like for me, it's kind of wrapped into what would I tell myself
Go
if
ahead.
I was to come out now with kind of the knowledge I have. I feel
Mm,
like it's a very similar amount of information where like you don't have to actually decide right now who you're going to be. I think a lot of the early part of my transition, I was trying to figure out what it meant to be male
mm.
and what it meant for me to be male, which is quite different. Um, and like I don't you don't need to do that.
Oh.
I didn't need to do that. Um, I would say that like it's probably fine to try and understand what roles society like specifically places on men
Mm-hmm.
and kind of put rules in quotes because like it doesn't really matter. Um, but how society kind of places rules on men, I think it might be important to know what those things are,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to engage with them.
Yeah.
I mean, on a day-to-day basis, does it really matter? No, and maybe this is just I was watching this or listening to this podcast. Um, it's called "We're Having Gay Sex." It's a great podcast, by the way. And in one of the episodes, they were talking about how you just like at some point you just kind of stop focusing so much on that like transitional point, whether you're trans or not, of am I gay, am I trans, like there's so much focus on that part.
Yeah,
And then
for
when you
sure.
stop focusing on that as much, it's kind of like, well, I'm just living my life.
Mm-hmm.
It does it really matter? And so maybe that's what that feeling is, that if I had just relaxed and lived into who I wanted to be in interactions and less looking at how society wants me to be, it would have been a little bit. I think I could have gotten to this place faster.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Did you feel like you were trying to fit into a stereotypical male role when you first
No,
transitioned?
no. I think there was a lot of, at least, well, I don't know if it was just me, but I think when you're deciding to change from one gender to another one, there's a lot of thinking about like, well, why do I actually need to do this? What does this actually mean for me? And
Yeah.
so I think that unpicking process means that you kind of go like, oh, is this what it means? Is this what it means? And I mean, in my opinion, it's all just kind of constructed. Um, and the beauty of being trans is that I get to decide if I want to accept those aspects or not, right? Or at least that's how I'm thinking about it. Um, so like I remember there was this beautiful moment at some family dinner with my grandparents where my grandma said to me like, it's your job to fill up to fill up the drinks.
Oh.
And I was kind of like, oh, well, I mean, I can choose to do that because I want to, or knowing that in her view and in my familial view, that's like a male job.
Okay.
But it's also really beautiful that my grandma is telling me, this is what I expect you to do,
Right.
which means that she is actually seeing me that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, I can decide if that's something I want to do and if that makes me feel male to
Mm-hmm.
do. I don't know. That's maybe not the best
What did you decide to
description.
do?
I do it for her. Yeah. But every time I do something like that, I'm very conscious of like, am I stepping into a traditional role? Am I stepping into a traditional role in my family? Like, is this what I really want to be doing? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those things just go through my head as opposed to just doing it because that's something that men do,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I feel like
Yeah,
that's
but
something that we all start thinking about when we become aware of gender roles and expectations that patriarchy has placed on whatever gender, either gender, both genders, all the genders. I mean, non binary is kind of left out of patriarchal expectations. So if we're just
yeah,
thinking about the binary, but
that's true. Although I think that non-binary gets slotted in, like I think they get inadvertently slotted in depending on how they're presenting, right? So
yeah.
their gender expression, I think, just gets erased,
Mm-hmm.
which is what patriarchy is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's actively erasing as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just ignoring.
True.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Either you're presenting more male or you're presenting more female. Thus, we're going to identify you with group A or group B.
Yeah.
And those are the expectations that we will place on you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I think, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I feel like when, at least for me, when I started becoming aware of roles and traditional gender roles and all of these societal expectations, that it makes me think about what I do and what I don't do, and how that may or may not be perceived by the general public. Like, for example, not shaving my legs.
Hmm.
I stopped doing that a long time ago, maybe even before I came out. I honestly don't remember anymore. Um,
It's been
but
10 years.
yeah, 10 years of hair freedom. But I stopped doing it because I didn't want to do it anymore. Because I think it's stupid that women have that expectation placed on them, that beauty standard placed on them for no good reason. Um, but I am also very aware every time I go into public in shorts or in a skirt or a dress that people they either start from the bottom and work their way to the top of me, or they start from the top and they work their way down, and they're like really confused by my leg hair
Yeah.
and the way that I'm presenting as a female. Um, so it's annoying, but
Yeah. My partner also doesn't shave her legs, and I have to check myself going like, it's not a problem at all. And I say that because like I she has bodily autonomy over herself. That's not what a relationship is like, right? But there are definitely certain situations where I'm like, are other people going to be rude about it
mm-hmm.
or weird about it?
Yeah.
And for me, I think it comes from a place of like, is this an acceptable situation for that? And I need to just like stop thinking thinking that first thought,
Yeah.
uh, because we're adults and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And no management necessary.
No, no. And I mean, body hair is such an interesting policing that happens
Mm-hmm.
for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's different, right? Um, so I don't know, because men also get policed for like the appropriate amount of body hair, which
Mm.
I find it silly because like it's not something you can control. You don't get to choose like
Right.
this is exactly what it looks
Yes.
like.
Yeah, it's out of your control unless it's somewhere you want to shave.
Right, right. Or you want to do other kinds of body treatments that are, you
Mm,
know, more advanced
mm-hmm.
than shaving. Um, yeah, that's something I have had to come to terms with because I feel like every trans person who goes through a medical transition and uses hormones, they always want them to do something very specific, and you don't get to choose that either. So,
Yeah.
like, I didn't get to choose that I lost most of my head hair, um,
Mm,
or like what my beard was gonna look like,
right.
and or where the rest of my body hair is and is not, you know.
Right.
Um, and I think it's a good exercise
Yeah, totally.
remembering that.
Yeah.
Similarly, within the trans community, it was like if you're transitioning to male, you're becoming a man. If
Mm-hmm.
you're transitioning to female, you're becoming a woman. And there wasn't a lot of grace within that. But as as the communities have shifted and language has changed and people have I mean, arguably, if you look historically, I don't think there was really that distinction. I think that comes more from uh, outside society, like the medical community wanted that
Mm,
transition. Um, and there's a lot more variety within the community itself, even historically. Um, but I think we've just seen such a resurgence and change within it. So, like, non-binary identities and all kinds of ways to identify within a gender like galaxy
yeah.
even, um, which I think is great. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's kind of what I wish I had known
Mm.
before I transitioned.
Would you not have transitioned like to man? Would you be non-binary? I mean, it's not too late to identify as non-binary.
Right, yeah, I mean, I don't know is the real answer
Yeah.
to that. I feel like I have a lot of freedom in my relationship. So there's there's not like I may look hetero from the outside, but I don't quite know how I would identify if I wasn't in a long-term monogamous relationship.
Mm,
Um, just like I'm not sure if I was transitioning now, what route I would go.
mm-hmm.
Um, I'm happy with who I am becoming, but I understand that I'm still always becoming.
Right.
Uh, and I think that's part of what is exciting about the way that the queer community is changing and evolving the language that we use to represent ourselves. Um, is that, you know, I don't have to sit in like one specific spot. I can move around,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of learn and experience what else exists and
Yep.
what other people are doing
Yeah.
and thinking about. Um, and I think that like that's just part of a joy of this community in
Mm,
general,
the
right?
queer joy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just heard so Stacy Chomiak, who is on a previous episode, that's going to be released next week. She is doing an Instagram series during the month of June for and about queer joy. And what does it look like to have queer joy and express queer joy and live in queer joy? And I think you're touching on part of that at least.
Yeah, I think there's this. I think there's a series of queer joy that's happening, yeah, podcast specifically that like LA's public radio is doing as well
Oh,
in
okay.
June
Cool.
because it's kind of like to counteract um, or to counterpoint all of the anti-LGBT um, stances that are just, I think we all kind of thought we were beyond this.
Yeah, I know.
And
Yeah.
this backlash is fierce and
Yep.
there's something else.
Yeah.
And it really is quite frightening, I think. Um,
Yeah, I was wondering how you were feeling about it.
so I feel like because I live in a state that has a lot of protections, and likely will fight tooth and nail if anything federally comes down. I don't know that I really get to feel as anxious as I
Yeah.
sometimes do. Um, but so I now follow this trans woman, Erin Reed. She does weekly or like monthly trans like legislation maps. She's been
Okay.
uh, recording all of the anti-trans and uh, positive trans laws for like 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
She has quite a really comprehensive look at what's happening.
Cool.
Um, there really aren't trans people that are, you know, trying to change how cis people engage with the world.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these anti-trans laws, which they don't always come from um, turf related spaces, a lot of the time they're religious or they're just, you
Mm-hmm.
know, being used to control people. They're just going to increase the violence against trans people.
Yeah.
They're going to increase suicide rates. They're just a way to eradicate trans people,
Yeah.
which is quite terrifying. Like Florida and Missouri now have actively detransitioned people, which is frightening. Um, and
Like kids or adults?
adults. They first started with kids and now it's adults. So they've made these laws that are really confusing for healthcare providers, and basically
Mm,
all healthcare providers are have stopped treatment um, because they can get sued,
gotcha. Yeah.
and it's unclear what will happen. I mean, I have a therapist unrelated to trans issues who is based in Missouri, and she won't even talk to me about trans stuff anymore, even
Wow.
though that's like not really, I mean, it's part of my life, but it's not really why I'm talking with her.
Right.
Um, but yeah, she has to be careful about what she looks up
Mm,
on any sort of, search history. Like it's just kind of wild.
wow.
Um,
Sounds like
yeah, so
communist China.
almost, yeah. Uh, and like trans people aren't a huge percent of the population. They're
Right?
like 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it's it's really interesting that this is happening.
So when you say that these two states have been detransitioning people, it's it's because the medical care for transitioning has been removed for people who are currently transitioning, thus they are
so like
detransitioning.
yeah, yeah, no refills on
Yeah.
prescriptions. And what's really dangerous about this is going cold turkey on hormones is really hard on your body
Mm-hmm.
and your mind,
Yeah.
right? Um, so ideally, if you knew this was going to happen, you would probably want to titrate and you can't if you just can't get access.
Right.
Yeah, it's really, I don't know, it's scary out there,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
so it's important to be celebrating queer joy. Um, and also I really wish there was, well, there is a single organization. You can donate to the ACLU. They're helping fight some of these anti-trans laws, but I'm in the process, in the early stages of seeing if, because I live in a sanctuary state, if I can sponsor someone and
Oh,
I have space um, to do that. It seems really difficult. I haven't found an organization that is doing this, so it might
interesting.
just be word of mouth. Um, but yeah, it's quite interesting the what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, you also have really great things happening. Like San Francisco now has universal basic income for trans people specifically.
Oh, wow.
For I think it's like a year or something like that. Like they're trialing it,
Yeah, okay.
um, which is just great because trans people tend to not have employment, like have difficulty getting employment
Right.
because of
Exactly.
documents or
Discrimination.
right. So just having like a little bit of a lifeline
Yeah.
is huge. Um, and is something that like I hope gets trialed more places. But we'll see, you know.
Yeah. That's really
And
cool.
then you have a lot of states like that are becoming sanctuary states. I know Minnesota's one, Massachusetts, I think Washington State is also one. Um, and you also have states that are trying to solidify their protections for trans people at the same time that you have these states trying to strip rights from trans people. So, like Washington State, you can get full coverage on all kinds of medical parts of transition through their state insurance.
Wow.
So, like their version of Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, like, it's really weird to be living in a time where there's so many positives that are huge, but then there's also these negatives that are really terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and like who knows if this is where it's going to end, this anti-trans bills, if it's going to end at trans people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be alarmist or anything,
Mm-mm.
but I feel like we just don't really know what the power of this backlash will be.
Right.
And I think it's really like one of the things I that we've talked a little bit about has been community and
Mm-hmm.
how important community is to the queer community. How many times can I say community in a sentence?
As many as it takes.
um, but this is when those relationships are vital. That is how we survive, right?
Yep.
Through positive interactions with people who understand us. It doesn't mean that your family connections aren't important because we really need allies and we need allies who are good allies. And there's a lot of parents that I've seen of young trans kids who are trying really hard to advocate for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think all around, the queer community needs strong allies and strong relationships. And that's my 2023 goal is to rework on some of my community building,
Cool.
basically.
I love
Yeah,
that you're trying to be a sanctuary house or whatever it's called.
yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But uh, I've been hearing that a lot of the barrier people want to move. Some
Yeah.
people want to move.
Yeah. The people
There's
who
like
can.
two thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Move to a better state. I mean, at this point, yes, move because you just won't get the care that you need.
Right.
Uh, but before some of these laws came down, people were like, well, I mean, this doesn't make sense. I should stay here and try and fight this
Right.
because that's been one of the difficulties is most because they're working through legislation, it's very localized. I can't go advocate for people in that state. They don't care about what I have to say because I am not their constituent at all. So it feels like very difficult to have like a united front.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one of the huge barriers is cost of living. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
move from Missouri to California, yeah, California is a sanctuary state and will let you stay here,
Mm-hmm.
but are you gonna get any help to stay here?
Right. Where are you gonna live?
Where are you gonna live? How are you gonna get a job? What do you have the money at all to move?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I feel like don't know why there isn't an organization that's doing this, but maybe we'll have to start one. I don't know.
Maybe you will.
That sounds a little ambitious for me.
Ain't nothing changes without ambition. So, what do you wish people understood?
Very simply, that we all just want to live our lives and feel safe.
Yeah.
Um,
Period. Period. No question mark. Period.
yes, yes. Just because you don't understand somebody doesn't mean that they're scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've being part of the trans umbrella community means that I meet all kinds of people who identify in different ways than I do and experience their transition in different ways and uh, decide to be very different people in the world, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist
Mm-hmm.
and that I have to feel threatened by them.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty simple.
Just
Sometimes,
let us live.
yeah, yeah. Let us have the joy that you get to have.
Mm-hmm. Let us live. Let us thrive.
Hmm.
Stop
Hmm.
putting so many barriers in the way for living and thriving.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like kind of to go back to the beginning where we met at Augustine, which was like the queerest church I had ever been
Yep.
to. Um, Seeing how vibrant that small community was
Mm-hmm.
because they celebrated people's queerness
Yep.
and it was such a blended community too.
Yep.
Like you had really old people who were very possibly traditional in their religious experience, and it had like this church had blended with an MCC church, so like the gay church from the States. And I don't want to say there were not issues, but like the leadership allowed for the vibrancy and like people's gifts to thrive in that space.
Yep.
And it's just so amazing what you can do by encouraging people,
Totally.
regardless of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, that was small scale, but I think it'd be really amazing if we could see uh, that kind of a space elsewhere. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I know they exist elsewhere, but
Not
like,
often enough.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We need to
And
encourage each other more.
and for a space like that to not get shut down.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll make sure to put in the show notes the links to
Oh yeah,
the
I can send you
organizations that you've talked about and the Aaron Reed.
that.
Yeah. Do you have a quote or song lyric that you would like to share to send us off like a benediction of sorts?
Okay, so since we have our Edinburgh connection,
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna do Joe Clifford's blessing from Jesus, Queen of Heaven. Feels very apt.
Awesome.
So, should I give any context for this?
If you want to.
Cool. Um, Joe Clifford is a trans playwright from the UK, and she rewrote Jesus's story as if Jesus is a trans woman. And there's a play you can see, it's global. She does it in Edinburgh, but then there are other Queen Jesuses around the world.
Oh,
So I
cool.
think there's one in Brazil, and I think she just started one in Norway.
Okay.
I think there's also one in Florida, which is really
Huh.
apt. But anyway, here's the very short blessing. Bless you if people abuse you or persecute you, because it means you are bringing about change. And bless those who persecute you too, because hatred is the only talent that they have, and it doesn't really amount to much. They will lose what little they have. And anyway, change will come in the end. And one day, the world will be free.
Mm-mm-mm.
So there's your Queen Jesus blessing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for joining. I'm so glad to get to talk to you.
Before we end, I think it must be acknowledged how amazing Sam's shirt is. What a vision of pride.
Yeah, so Kevin Garcia, also on the podcast, had this shirt and I was commenting on it and he said, you can get it from Target. So I did.
And it was still there.
Yeah, it was still there. It was not sold and it was not taken away.
All right. There's a little bit of queer joy and blessings.
Yeah, exactly. So now I have like three. Yeah, I got three queer shirts. At least three shirts from the Pride collection. But one of them, I mean, what is a queer shirt?
Well, I feel like there's an aesthetic that's a queer aesthetic.
Yes, but clothing is clothing. It has no gender
That's true. That's true. No
or
gender or
or
identity.
sexuality. Yeah. It is a piece of fabric of some
Yeah,
sort.
yeah. I mean, it's the person that makes the clothing queer, right?
That yeah, no. Well, to all the listeners, thank you for tuning in to yet another 10 years out story. Um, and yeah, until next time, I hope that you are experiencing some sort of queer joy in your life. Okay, bye.
Bye.